Alright, my fan's going kind of crazy right now, but I'm just going to keep grinding through these. So, this is chapter 26, part 2 of my review. Before I get too much into this, I said I'd find that formula, so I just googled it. The change in deposits is equal to your reserves over your reserve ratio. So, you remember when we were talking about how the money gets loaned out and then it comes back to the bank, and then they put some of it in reserves, and then they loan the rest out, and then they put some of it in reserves, and it just keeps cycling over and over and over again. Well, the total change in deposits, the total change, is equal to the initial reserves divided by the reserve ratio, and that's going to come up in a question in a bit. So this first question, suppose a commercial bank has a level of target reserves of 500 million and actual reserves of 575 million. That means that these other reserves are in excess. They're in excess, and they will be loaned out. So here we go. If all the banks in the banking system collectively have $500 million in cash reserves and have a target reserve ratio of 5%, the maximum amount of deposits the banking system can support is, that's just 500 million divided by 0.055%, gives us 10 billion. Just using this formula right here. Next question. Consider a new deposit of $10,000 to the Canadian banking system. The bank that initially receives this deposit will find itself with. So this is kind of going through a process of elimination, finding out which ones are right, which ones are wrong. So 1,000 of excess cash reserves if its target reserve ratio was 10%. So I'm going to look at the target reserve ratio and then figure out what the reserve should be. So if the reserve ratio is 10% and they get a new deposit of $10,000, then that means they have 9,000 of excess cash reserves, not 1,000, 9,000. No excess reserves if there is no reserve requirement. If there is no reserve requirement, then they should be loaning out all of it. They shouldn't keep anything in reserves. But right now they have 10,000 in reserves, so that's wrong. They have excess. They have 10,000 excess reserves. 10,000 of excess cash reserves if its target reserve ratio is 100%. Well, if the target ratio is 100%, then they have exactly as many as they need to. They have no excess reserves, right? Because if they're keeping everything in reserves, then nothing is in excess, ever. If the target ratio is 10%, again, it's 9,000, not 2,000. If it's 20%, that means that out of this $10,000, 2,000 of it, 20%, is going to be kept as reserves. The other 8,000 is going to be loaned out. So in that case, 8,000 are excess cash reserves that we don't need. Why is it unlikely that a bank run will occur in Canada today? What is a bank run? So a bank run is when one person tries to get their money and they don't get their money, and then everyone else is concerned that they're not going to get their money, so they try to take their money out as well. And what happens is everyone who's a customer at that bank tries to take out their money at the same time. The problem is the bank has loaned out a lot of their money, right? They only have so much of it on hand, so they can't give the money out to everyone, and in that case the bank fails, and that's called the bank run. It's happened before. He mentioned Mary Poppins as an example. So yeah, real life examples with David Johnson, but it's unlikely that it will happen today because the central bank can provide all the reserves that are necessary to avoid this situation. The central bank literally prints money. So if there isn't enough money, they can just print some more, or they have a bunch in their basement that they can just give to the bank temporarily until it's all sorted out. So it's not really something that could happen today. Here's that Bitcoin question. It will not be considered money unless which of the following conditions is satisfied. And that's just the 3 conditions for money. Generally accepted medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. We went over those before. Next one, reserves of the bank. We did that one. We went over this one too. Anything that says deposits is a liability unless it's deposits with the government of Canada, or the Bank of Canada, sorry. Not the government, the Bank of Canada, in which case it would be an asset. We did that one. which of the following is a common definition of money? So one of those three things, we have a generally accepted medium of exchange right here. All these other ones, no. Money doesn't have to be gold, Canadian dollar, foreign exchange reserves, or paper currency. None of those. And the largest component of the assets of the Bank of Canada is. The main purpose of the Bank of Canada is to loan money to the government of Canada. So their biggest asset is Government of Canada securities. Securities is another word for loans. That's it for part 2.